In a quiet neighborhood just outside Zurich, something strange began happening in the spring of 2023. Every morning, without fail, a fluffy gray cat named Leo appeared on the same doorstep, waiting patiently as if he belonged there. The woman who lived inside, a retired schoolteacher named Ingrid, didn't own a cat. But Leo didn't seem to care. He'd slip through her open door like he'd done it 100 times before, curl up in the same sunlit spot by the window, and nap for hours. At first, it seemed harmless, just a sweet animal looking for a little warmth and affection. But as weeks turned into months and Leo stopped going home altogether, the neighbors started asking questions. Why had he chosen her? And what happens when a cat decides it doesn't want to go back to its real owners? Hit like, subscribe, and let's go. Ingrid Muller had lived in the same apartment building for over 20 years. A retired language teacher in her late 60s, she enjoyed her slow mornings with a cup of chamomile tea and the radio playing softly in the background. Her days were filled with crossword puzzles, gardening on the balcony, and the occasional walk to the corner bakery. People in the neighborhood knew her as quiet but kind, the type who never missed watering her plants or saying hello in the hallway. She never had pets of her own, but she'd always had a soft spot for animals. Maybe it was the silence in her home that made her more attuned to their presence. So, when Leo the cat began showing up at her door, she didn't question it too much. She simply opened the door and her heart a little wider each time. She had no idea how much that small act of kindness would come to matter. One chilly morning in October, Ingrid noticed something odd. Leo hadn't just stopped by, he had stayed the entire night. She found him curled up on a pile of laundry in the hallway, purring as if he'd always lived there. She looked around, half expecting someone to knock on the door, asking for their cat back. But no one came. The next day, the same thing happened. And the day after that. At first, she figured his owners must be away or perhaps working long hours. Still, she couldn't help but wonder why her place. Why now? She left out a small dish of food just in case. That's when she noticed it. Leo's collar was missing. It used to have a little silver tag. Had it fallen off? Or had someone taken it? It was a small detail, but it unsettled her more than she expected. By November, Leo was practically living in Ingrid's apartment. He'd slip in through the door before she could close it, settle onto the couch, and stay until well after dark. She started leaving the window cracked open during the day, just in case he wanted to come and go. He rarely left. What started as occasional feeding turned into scheduled meals. Chicken broth, soft kibble, even a blanket by the radiator. Ingrid knew it was getting out of hand, but she couldn't help it. The sight of him waiting at her door each morning filled something in her that had been quietly empty for years. Then, one evening in the stairwell, she ran into a woman from the second floor. "Have you seen our cat?" the neighbor asked, holding up a photo of Leo. Ingrid's heart skipped. She smiled politely and said no, just a few sightings here and there. She told herself it wasn't a lie. Not really. A few days later, Ingrid found a note slipped under her door. It was handwritten, polite, but firm. "Please stop feeding our cat. He no longer returns home, and we are very worried. Family Roth, apartment 2B. Ingrid stared at the paper for a long time, her hands trembling slightly. She hadn't realized the full impact of her actions, or maybe she had and didn't want to face it. That afternoon, she followed Leo from her apartment to the building's inner courtyard, watching quietly as he paused outside a different door. He meowed, waited, then turned back toward her with that familiar look of contentment. No one came to call him inside. Later, she searched how to make a cat return home online. Forums, advice columns, even local pet shelter posts. All of them said the same thing: cats go where they feel safe, not where they're told. That night, she fed him a little less than usual, but still fed him. She didn't yet know how much that choice would cost her. A week later, a formal letter arrived, this time not handwritten, but printed, stamped, and unmistakably official. It was from the local municipal office. The Roth family had filed a complaint accusing Ingrid of influencing the behavior of a domestic animal belonging to another household. She read the words twice, then a third time, her heart pounding. They were threatening legal action if she didn't stop feeding Leo. Ingrid sat at her kitchen table for hours, the letter resting beside her untouched tea. She felt foolish, even ashamed. All she had done was show kindness. But now, the kindness was being labeled as interference, even harm. The idea of going to court over a cat seemed surreal, but here it was, black and white, signed and dated. For the first time, she looked at Leo differently. Was she truly helping him, or had she stolen something that never belonged to her in the first place? In early December, a knock at the door broke the cold morning silence. Two uniformed officers stood in the hallway, calm but direct. One held a folder, the other carried a small camera. They were here to document ongoing evidence related to the Roths' claim. Ingrid invited them in, her voice shaking. Leo, unaware of the tension, trotted up to the officers and rubbed against their legs. They asked simple questions: how long had the cat been staying, what she had been feeding him, whether she had ever tried to return him. Ingrid answered honestly. Then came the hard part. They informed her the case would proceed to mediation. If unresolved, it could go to civil court. And if she was found guilty, she could face fines or worse, a record. That evening, she sat beside Leo, stroking his fur. He purred softly, completely at peace. She wasn't. Should she shut the door on him for good or stand by the bond they'd quietly built? What would you do in her place? A week before Christmas, Ingrid came home to find Leo missing. His blanket was untouched, his bowl still full. For the first time in months, the apartment felt empty again. She searched the courtyard, called his name softly near the bushes, even waited by the Roths' door. Nothing. That night, it snowed lightly and she couldn't sleep, imagining him out in the cold, or worse, locked away somewhere he didn't want to be. The next morning, a neighbor quietly mentioned seeing the Roths carry Leo into their car. No carrier. Just the cat, struggling a little, then going still. Ingrid's chest tightened. Maybe they'd taken him to relatives for the holidays, or maybe they'd had enough. But 3 days later, on Christmas Eve, she heard a soft scratch at her window. She pulled back the curtain, and there he was, eyes bright, for dusted with snow. He had come back, but this time she didn't know if she could let him in. Ingrid stood at the window for a long moment, heart pounding, hand resting on the latch. Then she stepped back. She couldn't risk another complaint or worse, but she also couldn't ignore him. Instead of opening the window, she quietly slipped on her coat and stepped outside. Leo blinked up at her, tail flicking gently. She crouched down, stroked his back, and whispered, "You have to go home now." That evening, she left a small note in the Roths' mailbox. Not defensive, not pleading, just honest. She apologized for overstepping, explained that Leo had come to her, not the other way around, and offered to help care for him only if they agreed. A few days later, she found a short reply: "We understand. Let's talk." No threats, just an opening. Sometimes kindness creates confusion, but sometimes it creates connection. Have you ever been caught between doing what's right and what feels right? Months passed and life slowly found a new rhythm for Ingrid. The cat visits became less frequent but no less meaningful. She learned to respect boundaries while holding onto the quiet friendship that had blossomed unexpectedly. The Roth family and Ingrid exchanged occasional messages, navigating the tricky balance between ownership and affection. Ingrid often reflected on how something as simple as feeding a cat had turned into a complex web of emotions and consequences. It made her wonder about the invisible ties we create with others and what happens when those ties are tested. In the end, kindness isn't always clear-cut, and sometimes the hardest choices come with no easy answers. Have you ever faced a situation where doing what you believed was right conflicted with someone else's rules? What did you do? Share your story below.